The cards fell silent on the green felt table as Emmett Blackwood stared at the final reveal. His weathered face, once the envy of every poker player from St. Louis to San Francisco for its unreadable quality, betrayed nothing, but behind his steely gray eyes, a hurricane raged. Across the table, her obsidian eyes gleamed in the lamplight, not a flicker of emotion crossing her copper features as she laid down her cards with slender fingers adorned with silver and turquoise. A royal flush. The saloon fell deathly quiet. 20 years of building a fortune, a reputation, a legend, gone in a single hand. Emmett had gone all in against the mysterious woman known only as Dancing Shadow, a Lakota woman who had appeared in Silver Creek 3 weeks ago and systematically dismantled the town's poker hierarchy. Now she had claimed his final chip, his pocket watch, and the deed to the Golden Nugget, the saloon he had won in a legendary game 7 years prior. "Pleasure doing business, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her accent betraying an education that surprised most who encountered her. The gathered crowd murmured as she collected her winnings, her movements graceful and deliberate. Emmett remained seated, a statue carved from decades of frontier hardship. At 53, the former Union cavalry officer had survived Gettysburg, Apache ambushes, and a dozen attempts on his life by sore losers. He had built his reputation as the most feared card player in the West through cold calculation and an almost supernatural ability to read men's souls in their eyes. But this woman, she was different. Throughout the 5-hour game, she had been a mirror, reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. For the first time in 20 years, Emmett Blackwood had been outplayed. The spectators dispersed as Dancing Shadow left the saloon, her silk dress, an incongruous blend of Eastern fashion and native adornments, whispering against the rough-hewn floor. Only when the Batwing doors stopped swinging did Emmett reach for the half-empty whiskey bottle. "Leave it," growled Silas, the grizzled barkeeper who had witnessed Emmett's rise to prominence. "You need a clear head now more than ever." Emmett's hand froze midair, then withdrew. Silas was right. Something wasn't adding up. No one, regardless of skill, beats a player of his caliber without knowing his tells, his patterns. Either Dancing Shadow was genuinely the most gifted card player he had ever encountered, or something more sinister was at play. Either way, Emmett Blackwood hadn't survived this long by accepting defeat lying down. The following morning, Emmett awoke on a cot in the storeroom behind the bar, a humiliating fall for a man who once occupied the grandest suite above the saloon. His head throbbed not from whiskey, but from the relentless analysis that had kept him awake until dawn. He splashed water on his face from a chipped basin and studied his reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Lines etched deep from years squinting against desert sun and reading men's faces across poker tables. Gray hair that had once been as black as a raven's wing. But his eyes remained unchanged, cold, calculating windows to a tactical mind that had kept him alive and prosperous in a land that devoured the weak and careless. Today those eyes held something new, purpose. Silver Creek had transformed dramatically since the silver strike of '76. What had once been little more than a watering hole for cattle drives had blossomed into a prosperous town of nearly 2,000 souls. The main street boasted brick buildings, a hotel with actual glass windows, and 3 competing saloons, though the Golden Nugget had always been the crown jewel. As Emmett stepped onto the boardwalk, he noticed a sign painter already at work replacing his name with Dancing Shadow's Palace on the Golden Nugget's facade. The speed of the change suggested planning. This was no impulsive purchase by a lucky winner. This was calculated. The realization crystallized his suspicions. He adjusted his black Stetson, one of the few possessions not wagered in last night's disastrous game, and set off toward the telegraph office. Sheriff Wade Taylor was enjoying his morning coffee when Emmett entered his office. Their relationship was complicated, mutual respect tempered by the sheriff's disapproval of gambling and Emmett's disdain for authority. But they had reached an understanding over the years. "Heard about your run of bad luck last night," Wade said, not unkindly. At 48, the sheriff had seen enough of life's ups and downs to avoid gloating over another man's misfortune. Come to file a complaint, because losing fair and square isn't a crime, Blackwood. Emmett settled into the chair across from Wade's desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. Nothing fair about it, Sheriff. I've played cards across 2 decades and 15 states. Never seen anyone play like her. Not because she's good, though she is, but because she knew exactly how to play me. Like she'd been studying me for years. The sheriff's bushy eyebrows knitted together. You're saying she cheated? That's a serious accusation against any player in this town, let alone. He trailed off, uncomfortable with naming her heritage explicitly. Emmett leaned forward. I'm saying it was targeted. I sent telegrams this morning to contacts in Denver, Santa Fe, and San Francisco. Asked about a Lakota woman cleaning out professional poker players. Got 3 replies already. He placed the telegraph slips on the desk. Denver 6 months ago, Santa Fe 3 months back, San Francisco just 5 weeks past. Different names each time, but the description matches. She finds the biggest game, studies it, then moves in for the kill. Always a respected player with significant property holdings. Wade read through the telegrams, his coffee cooling forgotten. This doesn't prove cheating, Emmett. Maybe she's just that good. But his tone lacked conviction. Emmett's eyes narrowed. Sheriff, in the last hand she called my exact cards before I revealed them, whispered them to the man next to her. He confirmed it afterward. This new information straightened Wade's spine. That would be impossible without marking the deck or having a confederate, Emmett finished for him. I checked the cards afterward. No marks visible to the naked eye, which means someone was signaling her, and I aimed to find out who. The investigation began quietly. Emmett, stripped of his fortune but not his connections, called in favors from those who owed him. Timothy Wells, the telegrapher who had once been saved from ruin when Emmett forgave a substantial gambling debt, provided information on Dancing Shadow's incoming and outgoing messages. Clara Jenkins, the widow who ran the town's only hotel, revealed that the mysterious woman had paid for a month's lodging in advance with gold coins minted in San Francisco. Most intriguingly, Fletcher Williams, who drove the thrice-weekly stagecoach to the railroad station 30 miles east, recalled bringing a well-dressed white man to town 2 days before Dancing Shadow's arrival, a man who had asked pointed questions about Silver Creek's poker games and Emmett in particular. Over the next 3 days, a pattern emerged. Dancing Shadow had taken possession of the Golden Nugget but made few changes to its operations. She appeared each evening at 8 o'clock sharp, played cards until midnight, then retired to her rooms above the saloon, Emmett's former quarters. She won consistently but not suspiciously, building her reputation while avoiding the kind of spectacular victory that had ruined Emmett. Most telling was her apparent lack of interest in the other gambling establishments in town. She had claimed her prize and seemed content. This suggested to Emmett that the Golden Nugget itself had been her target all along. But why? On the 4th day after his downfall, Emmett spotted a stranger in town, a well-dressed man with a neatly trimmed beard and the soft hands of someone unaccustomed to physical labor. He watched from across the street as the man entered the Golden Nugget in the late afternoon, hours before Dancing Shadow typically made her appearance. 30 minutes later, the man emerged and headed directly to the hotel. Emmett followed at a discreet distance, years of reading body language allowing him to blend into the background despite his recognizable figure. The stranger checked into the hotel and went upstairs. Within minutes, a hotel maid was dispatched with a folded note. Her destination, Dancing Shadow's quarters above the saloon. That night, Emmett positioned himself at a table in the back corner of the Golden Nugget, nursing a single whiskey purchased with the few coins he had left. From this vantage point, he could observe both Dancing Shadow at her usual poker table and the well-dressed stranger, who had taken a position at the bar. To the casual observer, there was no connection between them. They never exchanged glances or words. But Emmett wasn't a casual observer. He had spent decades noticing the unnoticeable, and tonight he was watching for something specific. It came 3 hours into the evening, a pattern of finger tapping by the stranger against his glass whenever Dancing Shadow was involved in a significant hand. The taps varied, sometimes quick succession, sometimes spaced apart, sometimes a single deliberate press against the glass. A cold smile spread across Emmett's face as he finished his whiskey. In his younger days with the cavalry, he had learned Morse code for field communications. The stranger's tapping wasn't random. It was coded information about the cards other players held. The revelation brought both satisfaction and fury. His suspicions confirmed, Emmett slipped out of the saloon and made his way to Sheriff Taylor's residence. Wade listened to Emmett's evidence with growing concern. If what you're saying is true, they've been running this scheme across multiple territories. That makes it a federal matter. Emmett nodded grimly. I don't care whose jurisdiction it falls under. I want my property back, and I want them to pay for thinking they could outsmart me. The following morning, Sheriff Taylor sent telegrams to federal marshals and his counterparts in the cities where Dancing Shadow had previously operated. Emmett, meanwhile, set about the delicate task of gathering physical evidence. He needed proof of the cheating that would stand up in court. Through Silas, who still worked at the Golden Nugget despite the change in ownership, Emmett arranged to have the exact positioning of tables altered slightly. The change would be imperceptible to most, but would force Dancing Shadow to sit with her back to the bar, making the stranger's signals much more difficult to receive without obviously turning around. That evening, Emmett watched events unfold from the shadows outside. As predicted, Dancing Shadow struggled without her steady stream of information. Her play became more conservative, and for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, she ended the night with fewer chips than she'd started with. More telling was her Confederate's reaction. The well-dressed man left abruptly when it became clear their system had been compromised. Instead of returning to the hotel, he made directly for the livery stable. Emmett followed, moving with the stealth developed through years of navigating dangerous situations. He watched as the man hurriedly saddled a horse, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Going somewhere, Emmett's voice cut through the shadows of the stable like a knife. The stranger's hand darted toward his jacket, but Emmett was faster. The Colt Army revolver, his service weapon from the war and one of the few possessions he hadn't wagered, was already leveled at the man's chest. I wouldn't, Emmett advised coldly. I've killed men for less than what you've done to me. The stranger froze, his face illuminated by the single lantern hanging from a post. Up close, Emmett could see he was younger than he had first appeared, perhaps 35, with the sharp, assessing eyes of a man accustomed to calculating odds. You don't understand what you're involving yourself in, Blackwood, the man said, his accent suggesting Eastern education. This goes beyond a simple card game. Sheriff Taylor arrived with his deputy, summoned by a stable boy Emmett had paid to fetch them. Nathan Edwards, the sheriff announced after examining identification found in the man's valise. Wanted in Colorado and Nevada for confidence schemes. Edwards smiled thinly. Minor misunderstandings, I assure you. His composure was remarkable for a man caught in the act of fleeing. I assume Dancing Shadow is not her real name either, Emmett said, keeping his revolver trained on Edwards. You might be surprised, Edwards replied cryptically. The response sent a chill down Emmett's spine. There was something in the man's tone, not fear of capture but fear of something else, someone else. By morning, the story had spread throughout Silver Creek. Nathan Edwards was locked in the town jail, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. Dancing Shadow had disappeared sometime during the night, taking nothing but a small satchel and leaving the Golden Nugget deed on the bar. Most assumed she had fled to avoid prosecution, but Emmett wasn't convinced. The calculated precision of their scheme suggested contingency plans. Edwards remained unnervingly calm during his initial questioning, refusing to provide details about his partnership with the Lakota woman or their previous operations. His only comment, offered with an unsettling smile, "She'll be very disappointed to have lost the golden nugget. She had such specific plans for it." The marshal from Denver wasn't expected for at least 4 days, leaving Emmett time to investigate further. With the golden nugget temporarily closed pending legal clarification of ownership, he turned his attention to Dancing Shadow's abandoned quarters above the saloon. Sheriff Taylor accompanied him, insisting that any search be conducted legally. The room revealed little at first glance. She had taken her personal belongings and left nothing obviously incriminating. But Emmett's meticulous search eventually uncovered a small tear in the floral wallpaper behind the bed. Peeling it back revealed a hidden compartment in the wall, a feature Emmett himself hadn't known existed despite owning the building for years. Inside the compartment was a single item, a leather-bound journal. The first several pages contained what appeared to be records of poker games, dates, locations, players, winnings. But as Emmett continued turning pages, the contents shifted to something far more disturbing. Detailed notes about him, his playing habits, his tells, his property holdings. Pages dated nearly 3 years back. "This wasn't a random con," Emmett murmured, a chill settling in his bones despite the warm day. "This was targeted specifically at me." Sheriff Taylor looked over his shoulder at the journal. "But why? What made you worth 3 years of planning?" Emmett turned to the final written page and found his answer, a name he hadn't heard in almost 2 decades. Samuel Blackwood. Samuel, Emmett's younger brother by 7 years, killed in a disputed poker game in Dodge City back in '77. The official story was that Samuel had been caught cheating, drew on the accuser, and was shot dead in self-defense. Emmett had investigated at the time but found nothing to contradict the witness statements. He had mourned his brother, avenged him by tracking down and killing the shooter a year later, and eventually moved on with his life. But according to the journal, there was more to the story. Samuel hadn't cheated. He had been set up by the same Nathan Edwards currently sitting in Silver Creek's jail. And the reason was a blood debt dating back to the war, when Captain Emmett Blackwood's cavalry unit had been involved in a skirmish with a Lakota band near Fort Laramie. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Dancing Shadow wasn't running a simple confidence scheme. She was executing a meticulously planned revenge. Her real name, according to the journal, was Margaret Blackwood, née Dancing Shadow, Samuel's Lakota wife, whom Emmett had never known existed. She had spent 18 years planning her revenge against the men responsible for her husband's death, starting with Edwards himself, whom she had somehow convinced to become her partner. The golden nugget had been merely a stepping stone. Her true target had always been Emmett. And now she was missing, but the journal suggested she wasn't running away. The final entry chilled him to the bone. "When he discovers the truth, he will come hunting. I will be waiting at the place where it all began." Emmett closed the journal, his mind racing. "Fort Laramie," he said grimly. "That's where she's gone." Sheriff Taylor shook his head in confusion. "What's at Fort Laramie?" Emmett's expression darkened as memories from the war resurfaced, memories he had spent decades trying to bury. "The place where my unit was ambushed in '64. We lost 17 men. The survivors, myself included, tracked the Lakota band responsible to a small camp. We had orders to capture the warriors only, but—" he trailed off, the weight of past actions suddenly heavy on his shoulders. "Things went wrong. Women and children died. One girl escaped, couldn't have been more than 10 years old. She looked back at me before disappearing into the trees. I never reported it." Sheriff Taylor studied Emmett's face. "So Dancing Shadow, Margaret, was that girl?" Emmett nodded slowly. "Must have been. She married my brother years later, probably never knowing his connection to me. When Samuel was killed, she somehow learned the truth about Edward's involvement and about my past." He stood abruptly. "I need to go to Fort Laramie. This won't end until we face each other." The sheriff frowned. "Emmett, you're talking about riding nearly 300 miles based on a cryptic journal entry. Let the law handle this. When the marshal arrives—" "By then it might be too late," Emmett interrupted. She's not running, Wade. She's setting the final stage, and she's expecting me to follow. 2 hours later, Emmett rode out of Silver Creek on a horse purchased with money borrowed against the potential return of the Golden Nugget to his ownership. He carried minimal supplies, his service revolver, and a Winchester rifle. Sheriff Taylor had argued against this course of action, but ultimately couldn't legally prevent Emmett from leaving. Edwards remained in custody, strangely unperturbed by his partner's abandonment. His parting words to Emmett had been delivered with an unsettling smile. "She's waited 18 years for this moment, Blackwood. Do you really think you're riding to anything other than your death?" The question echoed in Emmett's mind as Silver Creek disappeared behind him. Perhaps Edwards was right. Perhaps this was a fool's errand. But Emmett Blackwood had never been one to hide from consequences, and he wouldn't start now. The journey to Fort Laramie took 11 grueling days through territory that had grown somewhat tamer since the war but remained dangerous for a lone traveler. Emmett avoided settlements where possible, making camp each night well away from established trails. He encountered few other travelers, a family in a wagon heading west, a pair of cattle buyers returning east, a small detachment of cavalry escorting a government surveyor. None had seen a Lakota woman traveling alone. Emmett wasn't surprised. Dancing Shadow, Margaret, had proven herself adept at moving undetected when she wished. The isolation gave him ample time to reflect on the past and the series of events that had led to this moment. His brother Samuel had always been the more reckless of the two, quicker to anger and slower to calculate consequences. Had he known his wife's true identity? Had he known of Emmett's involvement in the massacre that had orphaned her? The questions haunted Emmett as he rode. Fort Laramie had changed considerably since Emmett had last seen it during the war. Once a critical military installation, it had diminished in importance as the frontier pushed westward and conflicts with native tribes waned. Now it served primarily as a supply depot and way station. Emmett approached cautiously, uncertain what awaited him. The fort itself held no specific significance in his shared history with Dancing Shadow. The ambush and subsequent massacre had occurred nearly 30 miles northwest, in a narrow valley near the Cheyenne River. That, Emmett suspected, was his true destination, the place where it all began. He resupplied at the fort, answering questions about his business with practiced vagueness, and departed the following morning, heading northwest. The valley looked much as Emmett remembered it, a winding corridor of steep walls and scattered pine, with the river cutting through its heart. His unit had been ambushed near the western entrance, where the valley narrowed to a choke point perfect for an attack. 18 years had softened the landscape, erasing the physical evidence of violence, but Emmett could still see it in his mind's eye. The sudden rain of arrows, men falling, horses screaming in pain and fear. He dismounted, tying his horse to a stunted pine, and proceeded on foot, his revolver drawn. The massacre site, where the retaliatory bloodshed had occurred, lay another 2 miles upriver. If Dancing Shadow awaited him anywhere, it would be there. The camp had been situated in a small clearing beside the river, partially sheltered by a rock overhang. As Emmett approached, memories flooded back with visceral intensity. The smell of cooking fires, the sounds of women shouting warnings, warriors emerging from tipis with weapons in hand, his men firing indiscriminately in the chaos. He had tried to restore order, to remind them of their orders to capture only the warriors, but bloodlust and fear had overwhelmed discipline. By the time the shooting stopped, more than 20 Lakota lay dead, most of them women, children, and elders. The warriors had been away hunting, returning too late to prevent the slaughter, but in time to force the cavalry into retreat. And through it all, one child had watched from hiding, a girl whose eyes had met Emmett's as she fled. "I wondered if you would recognize this place," came a voice from behind him. Emmett whirled, his revolver raised, to find Dancing Shadow, Margaret standing 20 paces away. She wore buckskin now instead of the silk dresses from Silver Creek, her hair in a single braid down her back. A rifle rested in her hands, not quite pointed at him, but ready to be razed in an instant. "I recognize it," Emmett replied, keeping his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I've never forgotten it." A bitter smile crossed her face. "How noble of you to remember the place where you orphaned a child." Emmett didn't lower his weapon, but he didn't take aim either. "I tried to stop it. I gave orders, orders that your men ignored," she finished for him. "Yes, I've had 18 years to learn exactly what happened that day, to track down survivors, to piece together the chain of events." She took a step forward, her movements as graceful and controlled as they had been at the poker table. "Do you know what I discovered, Emmett Blackwood? That you were not the monster I believed you to be as a child. You didn't order the massacre. You even tried to prevent it. But when it was over, when you returned to the fort, you reported only the ambush, not the retribution. You protected the men who slaughtered my family." The accusation struck Emmett like a physical blow because he knew it to be true. He had filed a report mentioning only casualties inflicted on the hostile force, without detailing that most were non-combatants. He had told himself it was to protect his men, to prevent courts-martial that would ruin lives. But in his heart, he had always known it was cowardice, fear of the consequences to his own career and reputation. "Yes," he admitted, meeting her gaze directly. "I failed in my duty that day and again afterward. I've carried that knowledge ever since." His honesty seemed to surprise her slightly, a momentary hesitation crossing her features. "When I married Samuel, I had no idea he was your brother," Margaret continued, her rifle still at the ready. "It was years later, after he was killed, that I learned of the connection. By then, I had also discovered that Nathan Edwards had set up the cheating accusation that led to his death. Edwards had a gambling debt to the man who shot Samuel, a debt that was forgiven in exchange for framing your brother." Her eyes hardened. "I spent 3 years tracking Edwards down, convincing him I could help him become wealthy if he partnered with me. He never knew my true purpose until it was too late for him to escape it. I used him to learn the art of cheating at cards, then to help me take down professional gamblers across the West, all leading to you." The elaborate nature of her revenge plan stunned Emmett. "Why not just kill me? You've had opportunity." Margaret's laugh was cold. "Death would be too simple. I wanted you to experience loss as I did, to have everything taken from you by deception, to feel powerless. The golden nugget was merely symbolic. What I really wanted was for you to follow the trail back here, to confront the past you tried to bury." She raised her rifle then, aiming deliberately at his chest. "Now we've reached the end of the path. The question is, what happens next?" Emmett made no move to aim his own weapon. "If you're going to shoot me, then shoot. I won't deny you your vengeance." For long moments, they stood frozen in a tableau of past and present, predator and prey, victim and perpetrator, roles that had blurred and shifted over the decades of their intertwined fates. Margaret's finger rested on the trigger, her aim unwavering. Then, unexpectedly, she lowered the rifle. 18 years I've waited for this moment," she said quietly. "Dreamed of watching you die where my family died. But now that we're here, I find that more death won't restore what was lost." The tension between them didn't dissipate, but it transformed into something more complex. "What now, then?" Emmett asked cautiously. Margaret considered him for a long moment before responding. "Edwards will face justice for his crimes, both against Samuel and the others he's cheated. The golden nugget returns to your possession. I have no use for it. And you," she paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully, "you will carry the truth of what happened here for the rest of your days, but you'll also help me ensure it's not forgotten." From a pouch at her waist, she produced a folded document. "I've written an account of that day, from my perspective as a survivor. Your signature beside mine will confirm its truth." Emmett holstered his revolver slowly and approached to take the document. He read it carefully, a detailed, unflinching account of the massacre and its aftermath. At the bottom was a space for his signature alongside hers. "If I sign this, what happens to it?" he asked. "It goes to a newspaper editor in Denver who has agreed to publish it," Margaret replied. "The names of the soldiers involved are included. Some are dead now, but others still live. They'll face whatever consequences come. Emmett nodded slowly. It would mean disgrace for him, possibly even criminal charges. But it would also mean, finally, accountability for actions too long hidden. He removed a pencil from his coat pocket and signed his name with a steady hand. 3 weeks later, Emmett Blackwood sat at his usual table in the Golden Nugget, a copy of the Denver Post open before him. The article occupied the entire front page, Massacre at Cheyenne River, the untold story, with his signature and Margaret's clearly reproduced beneath the account. The fallout had been swift. 2 of his former soldiers, now prominent businessmen in Denver and Cheyenne, had been arrested for murder. Others faced public disgrace. Emmett himself had been questioned extensively by Army investigators, but released pending further review of historical records. His reputation lay in tatters, but for the first time in 18 years, he felt the weight of secret guilt beginning to lift. The Batwing doors swung open, and conversation stuttered to a halt as Margaret entered. She no longer used the name Dancing Shadow, instead embracing her legal name as Samuel Blackwood's widow. She wore a simple dress that blended Western and Native elements, her hair still in its single braid. Without hesitation, she crossed to Emmett's table and took the seat across from him. "I expected you to be long gone from Silver Creek by now," she said, studying his face. Emmett folded the newspaper carefully. "This is my home. I don't run from consequences." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, I suppose you don't, not anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, these 2 people bound by tragedy and blood, by guilt and vengeance, and perhaps now by something approaching understanding. "I'm establishing a foundation," Margaret finally said, "for the education of Lakota children. The money I acquired during my years with Edwards will fund it." Emmett nodded, unsurprised by her desire to create something meaningful from the ashes of her revenge. "Samuel would have approved," he said quietly. It was the first time he had spoken his brother's name to her. Her eyes softened slightly at the mention of her husband. "Yes, he would have. He was a good man who saw me as I was, not as what he expected a Lakota woman to be." As the sun set over Silver Creek, casting long shadows through the windows of the Golden Nugget, Emmett and Margaret continued their conversation, not as enemies or even as reluctant allies, but as 2 people acknowledging a shared past while contemplating separate futures. The wounds inflicted decades ago would never fully heal, the losses never completely fade. But in the accounting of truth, in the acceptance of responsibility, they had found, if not peace, then at least the possibility of moving forward. The professional poker player had indeed gone all in against a mysterious Native woman and lost his fortune. But in that loss, Emmett Blackwood had found something he hadn't realized was missing: his honor. The code of the West was unforgiving but simple at its heart. A man's word was his bond. Debts, whether of money or blood, had to be paid. And sometimes redemption came in the most unexpected forms. As Margaret rose to leave, Emmett remained seated, watching the last light of day paint the walls of his saloon gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: legal battles, public scrutiny, the continuing process of reconciliation with the past. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of an 18-year journey toward this moment, he would simply breathe and remember why the frontier had drawn him in the first place. The promise that no matter how far a man had fallen, the vast horizon always offered the possibility of becoming something better than he had been before. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.